So thank you very much for joining us on our Engage People Elevate series. I think the purpose of these discussions is to invite along some of our the clients that we work with, some of the individuals we work with in sort of different capacities, and really chat about the job market. What's helpful for people to understand, both from a hiring perspective as well as people joining the job market. Now, I think it's fair to say you and I have been involved in different capacities in graduate recruitment for probably more years than we care to remember. We're both judges, obviously, at the Grad Ireland AHEX Awards, which is the Advanced Higher Education setup. Basically, it's something I really enjoy. It keeps me very present and sort of up to date with what's going on in the sector. So maybe what might be useful is a quick snapshot of your own career journey, Siobháin, if it's okay to ask, maybe, and you can take us up to what the day job involves.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, pleasure to be here. And as I said, we've known each other for quite a few years now, crossing paths on the graduate side. And I will say, from my own perspective, I've been working in the graduate space for 8 years now. So I certainly learned a lot from you in the first couple of years in that. So it's great to be here to share my own insights from it. From a career journey, I'm probably one of those ones that you may refer to maybe as a late bloomer. I certainly didn't have any clear career destination in my mind when I left college. Way back in the day, I did languages in UCC. I did French and Spanish, and loved Spanish. Not so hot in the French. I suppose what I was really clear about coming out of college, that's what I didn't want to do. So I didn't want to do teaching, and I didn't want to work in translation or anything like that. So basically, I ran away to Spain for a few years. I taught English over there for a while. And during my early to mid-20s, I suppose I was backwards and forwards from Spain and Ireland, doing various roles and kind of just living my life and figuring out what I wanted to do. Came back to Ireland in my late 20s. And said, I have no idea what to do with my life. It was the middle of the Celtic Tiger. People were telling me there's loads of jobs out there, but the thing I was very clear on there, again, was I didn't want to do sales, and really didn't feel I was qualified to do much. So what I did was I went back to the CIT at the time, which is now Munster Technological University, and I did a part-time course in the evenings in HR. Because I said, okay, well, yeah, I might be able to deal with people from that side of things. And I actually ended up taking a 2-month contract in a company, which extended into 4 years later. And then I moved to Musgrave in 2007, actually, as when I joined Musgrave as a HR business partner at that stage. And I suppose at that time, I'd left a company where really I had grown quite a bit, but there was probably for me the challenges around company values versus my own values. Joined Musgrave at the time. To be honest, I didn't know a huge amount about Musgrave, which for a Cork person is nearly a cardinal sin. But I figured, okay, what I knew about their values and the opportunity that was there at the time, I said, look, yeah, I think it's going to be a good opportunity for me to learn. And through the nearly 15 years I've been there, I've worked in a number of roles within HR. I came in probably more in kind of a HR officer role, focusing on the likes of administration, compensation and benefits. I worked through doing redundancies. I was responsible for quite a number of different redundancy programs within my role at that stage in time, which really was the impetus for me getting exposure to coaching. And I ended up doing a coaching qualification at that time. And of course, eager and enthusiastic. I wanted to put all these skills into use. Like, oh yeah, I definitely want to do coaching. This is what I want to do. And within the business at the time, the only opportunity really before that was within the graduate program. Just had come up. Again, hands up, I didn't know a huge amount about our own graduate program, but went into it at the time. And I'm not going to lie, there were some challenging moments for myself, a big learning curve, and a big learning curve about myself and my own abilities and having more confidence in it from that side of things. But I suppose I've been in this role now for 8 years, learned a huge amount. And I suppose for me, one of the biggest kicks that I get out of my career right now is working with our graduates as they come into the business, and also now our interns and other early career pathways, and to be able to see them at the very beginning of their journeys. And some of them are going to be hyper focused and say, yeah, this is where I want to get to. This is where I'm going to be by in the next 5 years. Others come in knowing that they want to do something. They've resonated with what we stand for as an organization and the industry, but they're not exactly sure where they want to go. And it's about helping them to realize their potential from that side of things. So I've had plenty of ups and downs. So that's a whistle-stop tour of my career.
And you're speaking of graduates, you've graduated yourself several times at this point now between your primary degree. So tell me, I've always admired, and certainly since my involvement in Grad Ireland and the various pieces, like Musgrave to me would be a shining light as an employer in that they really have developed their own, what I would call sort of organic graduate training program. And I would see it as being genuine competition. So say within the accounting world, you've obviously got the professional exams. So people graduate and then they have another 3 years to chartered accounting exams. If they decide to go down the practice route, and then you've obviously got maybe the legal space where people go down. But what Musgrave has put in place, and I know you obviously you support people who want to become accountants as well. What was from a strategy perspective? Has that always been the case, or has it been something primarily over the last 10 years, or maybe just to understand a little bit about Musgrave's strategy in that respect?
Yeah, and I think Musgrave has had a graduate program in some shape or form since the mid-90s. And actually, our very first graduate, Edel Russell, is now our Insight and Innovation Director and is
Wow.
a great sponsor for our graduates as well. And she's actually responsible for setting up our first youth board, GenRep, in the business, which was set up last year. So I think we've always had a really strong interest in terms of bringing in talent and developing it, but it has taken different forms over the years. As I said, I would have come into the role back in 2014, and at that time, I suppose we were probably stuffing with a bit of an identity crisis in some ways, because I suppose Musgrave, people didn't really know who Musgrave are. And to be honest with you, we probably still have a challenge in terms of shouting about ourselves a bit more.
Yeah.
We've always had our retail brands front and fore, so people are very familiar with the likes of SuperValu, with Centra, with Donnybrook Fair, now Frank and Honest. They don't necessarily understand that Musgrave sits behind that. So if you hear the name Musgrave, people have said, oh, the cash and carry. If you go to Northern Ireland, people said, oh, the hospital, and all these different things. So I think when I came into the role, there was definitely a piece of looking at the program we had, recognizing what was good, but then I say, what is our strategy for the future to be able to say, okay, right, we want to attract the best, but to attract the best, we need to be able to offer them something of worth as well. So for us, there was probably a number of different elements we had to look at. Was firstly, you have to say, okay, well, we have to make ourselves an attractive looking employer from that side of things. So how do we do that? So there was a lot about growing the brand awareness, working with colleges, working on our social media presence, our website and all of that. But in tandem with that, we had to look at our offer. And we already had been working with the Irish Management Institute, the IMI, for a number of years on our development program. And what we did at that stage was, I suppose, we shifted more so from the professional development to more of a focus on personal development as well as part of that, because we knew that was coming more and more to the fore in terms of that leadership sense for graduates. So you can give them all the technical skills they want, but if you're not developing them and really allowing them to explore their own values and their purpose and that side of things, then you could be putting a square peg in a round hole if you don't give them the opportunity to explore that. So we started to move that direction. And it wasn't an easy journey by any means. And one of the key things for us was to get the buy-in from our senior team. So we went to them with proposal in terms of how we would go about doing that. Thankfully, they trusted in us. And I say in us, our chief HR officer, Matt O'Callaghan, set us a target back in 2016 that we would be a leading graduate employer by 2020. I'll be honest with you, Paul, I laughed. I cried a bit. I laughed a bit because it just seemed so far out of reach. And I say that in the context of, in Grad Ireland in particular, I suppose at that time you would go into the Grad Ireland Recruitment Awards, which were absolutely fantastic. And you go to those and you see the likes of the big four. So you've got Deloitte, EY, KPMG. All of those are there winning the big awards. You've got Jemison, which is an amazing program as well. And all these different programs. I said, God, will we ever be recognized on that? And I think for us, there was probably some of our own challenges in terms of, well, I say this, our own. So for me, is probably in terms of my own piece of saying, can we do this? But I think one of the things we did, I suppose, was definitely take in feedback. We got feedback from our graduates in terms of what they wanted. We got feedback from market research. We spoke to other graduate employers to understand what the offer was and to really shape and form that. And it's continuously evolving. So for us, it's really that point where we say, okay, well, you can't sit in your laurels. And I don't think any graduate employer can, because you have to be evolving to be able to shape that. And thankfully, on foot of that feedback, we've been able to progress, and we've had some fantastic success in terms of the Grad Ireland Awards in particular, I suppose, being recognised as Graduate Employer of the Year twice. 2 of our graduates have won Graduate Employee, which I think for me is probably the proudest piece, because what that is, that really recognises the experiences our graduates get and the responsibility they get. and it's a recognition for their growth over the course of the program as well as part of that. So I'm probably going slightly off tangent from the question that you're mentioning, but I just think it's an important piece to be able to take for a company or an employer to be able to take that step back and to be able to say, okay, well, what are we doing with this talent? Why are we bringing them in? And okay, then shape the program to be able to give them what they need as well. And you mentioned finance. We do bring finance graduates in as well. And I think the finance graduates we attract would be probably more focused in terms of they want to get that industry experience. They want to work in a really fast-paced environment, and I suppose they want to be able to say, okay, right, there's something here where I want to be looking forward as opposed to looking backwards. And we know we can't compare with the big four from that side. We can't offer what they do. They have a fantastic offer. It's absolutely amazing. But the numbers we bring in are much smaller. But because of that, it's more agile. You give different responsibilities to the graduates as well. And I think it's really just tailoring your offer and be able to tell graduates what to expect when you come in. When they come in, and as part of that, I think that has helped us in terms of growing our reputation as an employer.
And I think the hands-on commercial skills you get sort of from day one, there's definitely advantages, and it's about what's going to suit the individual best. You mentioned the Grad Ireland Awards, which are obviously upcoming at the time of this discussion. One of the things I've always really enjoyed just the event itself and the leading up to it is that there's such a sort of a collegiate environment where it's very friendly. I think so even though there's huge competition, I've no doubt everyone's under big pressure to try and get the best people and the best fit and so forth. But gosh, I find, because we would speak to quite a few companies who are coming into Ireland, and I could refer them on to any number of different sort of graduate employers, and it's always extremely helpful, even though there is that competition there. And it's probably something that maybe sort of, I wouldn't say evaporates, but is less common as you go on, because the demand for people at a more senior level maybe becomes it's a bit more sort of visible. So, but it's great fun. I think it's sort of a celebration type event as much as anything else. If we maybe look at the employer mindset first of all, as in what's in it for the employer, what's in it for Musgrave, and feel free to speak from a generic perspective rather than specifically Musgrave. What are you really hoping for in terms of the end product? So you've got the funnel of people who are coming in, and I know you work literally all over the country and probably further afield to attract in applicants. Basically, they work through a process. By the time the person starts on their first day, what are you hoping for from a sort of a mindset perspective, from an academic perspective? What sort of high on your list of priorities at that point?
Yeah, and I suppose for us, when you look at the graduates you're hiring, what you are looking to hire is for, as you rightly said, the specific mindset you want to be able to get from that, and there's also I suppose the potential there. So, and I think this is really important for any graduate who does watch this, is that we're not expecting you to be a finished product. We're not necessarily hiring you for your skills. In some areas, for example, technical side, yes, there will be some academic background you think that will be useful to our business. But for us, it's really about the individual in terms of how and their desire to work in our industry. It's also the curiosity that they bring and that mindset. And we hear a lot about it nowadays, which is the growth mindset. So what we mean by that is that willingness to learn, that willingness to be able to pick themselves up when things go wrong, because things are guaranteed to go wrong from that side of it. So it's people who come in and say, like, yeah, I see myself in this industry. Maybe I'm not necessarily really clear about where I see myself, but yeah, I see myself working here, and just really putting themselves fully into that experience and embracing the experience that we go on. One of the things that we say to our graduates when they come in first day is, like, you are responsible for your development and you're responsible for your career. We will give you the opportunities and we will support you insofar as we can as part of that, but ultimately it's their responsibility to be able to take on board those. And you will see that the graduates who really take on that, and you will just see them absolutely thrive from that side of things. Now, they'll have setbacks as well as they go through that. From an academic perspective, we recruit from an honours degrees. That is the only criteria that we have. We don't have a 2-1 criteria. We would have in the past, but I suppose when you take that step back and you say, okay, well, there's people bloom at different times. So I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm a bit of a late bloomer, and hopefully we'll continue to do that as I progress. But sometimes college may not be the best time for people. We've come out of 2 horrendous years of lockdown where people have had really challenging times studying within their bedrooms, really difficult situations, not getting the college experience that they wanted to as part of that. And that has had different effects on different people. Some people would thrive in that, other people have found it quite difficult. So it's unfair to say to somebody, okay, well, you didn't get that 2-1, so therefore we're not going to consider you. you said, well, you're asking for an honours degree, you're differentiating there. So you have to have some level of distinction for a graduate scheme. So the criteria we put is that, but really as they go through that selection process, it's understanding more about that desire to work with us, that potential, that demonstrating the ability of where they've failed and learned, and also where they've succeeded, and to be able to bring that through to us. And that's what we want to understand and to bring into our business.
And just out of interest, I mean, for someone who maybe has got on the honours path and they're in good shape on that front, but may have some limited experience, and they really want to be able to demonstrate that growth mindset piece. What sort of suggestions would you give to people maybe in that situation? They want to really accentuate what they have. I mean, what any sort of top tips in that regard?
Yeah, and I think this is particularly relevant for, again, coming out of the last 2 years where people may not have had the opportunity to do placements. I think really for graduates listening to this, I think the really important thing is that you look at all aspects of your life and where you can demonstrate that growth mindset. And that may come through study. So you may have come across challenges in that. So how did you overcome those challenges? It may be through volunteering. It may be through clubs and societies. It may be through sports. It may be through a part-time job. And quite often, I think, particularly in the part-time job, people can overlook in terms of the experiences they get as part of that. I think as human beings, we tend to just overlook what we've learned. We just assume that we've always known it. Whereas if you take that step back from where you start your part-time job to where you are 12 months later, and what you've learned from customer service, for example, or all these different business skills that you would have picked up unknowingly. And it's taking a moment to reflect and say, okay, I've worked in a SuperValu for a part-time basis for the last 2 years. What have I learned from that? And some people have come into interviews like, it was only a part-time job, I didn't do much. But the people who shine would say, God, yeah, do you know what? It was absolutely fantastic because I learned customer experience, I learned responsibility, I learned initiative, and you really give examples of how they've demonstrated that through their role as part of that. So I think, and again, as I said, people may not have had that opportunity or they may not have had placements, but look through what you've done in your life to date and be able to say, okay, when have I come across challenges? How have I overcome those? Where have I succeeded? Why did I succeed? What really drove me in terms of doing that? And those are opportunities for people to be able to say, yeah, I have that mindset.
Yeah, very good. And one of the things, just from working with yourself and some of the other graduate employers, I've always been really impressed by is that I think sometimes remember when I was graduated and I joined a company and people would say, geez, they don't make them like they used to, and it was always the next generation was always the whatever way you want to describe it. And we've some recent graduates in our team and hopefully close to employ another. And I learned pretty quickly, I'm in my 40s now, and if I keep giving out about this, that, and the other, it's not going to make me much of an employer, and it's probably not going to work for them either. So it's up to me as an employer basically to get with the program and to still hold people accountable and have the right sort of alignment piece. But in relation to where you feel from what you've experienced maybe over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, if you were looking at maybe some of the graduates coming out today, what's sort of impressing you, and if there is anything, and I know it's hard making a sweeping generalization, but what's your sort of what have you identified maybe as being maybe a bit of a point of focus for people to give themselves the best chance of success?
I think if you look over the last few years in particular, what really stands out to me is their desire to be involved and their desire to have their voice heard and to make a contribution. So and I remember a number of years back reading about Gen Z and it's that piece that they want to work with someone as opposed to for someone. And you can really see that coming through from graduates when they're joining a company, they're joining because they want to make a difference in that organization or because they identify with something from it, be it the purpose, be it the values, whatever that may be. And the majority of them want to come in and to be able to make that contribution and to be able to say, yeah, I made an impact here. And it's that desire to do that. Whereas if you look back a number of years ago, people might have been more focused in terms of, I just want to progress in my career. They do want to progress in their career, but it's again understanding, okay, well, how can I contribute to this? And it's not contributing in terms of a glory piece of, yeah, look at me, I'm amazing. It's more they want to make things better. And I do think it's important, as you said, it's important to be able to cultivate a culture where that's welcomed, and it's not a case of, oh, you're only a graduate. So we talk about in Musgrave, we talk about use the graduate card. So the graduate card is actually that piece where you have permission to get involved in things and you have permission to speak up and say, look, is there an opportunity for me to get involved in that project? can I sit in that meeting to get more visibility? You can ask, sometimes you'll get in, sometimes you won't. But I think that gives you a lot of permission that you wouldn't necessarily get to start your career otherwise. And I think the graduates who you see really succeeding leverage that in a really positive way. And there are so many different things, achievements and accomplishments that our graduates have contributed to our business, that you can take a step back and say, yeah, look, when they come in, they're not doing a role that's kind of on the sidelines. They're very much involved and having an impact on our business. And I think that's, if your recruitment process works well, you're getting the right people who are going to make that contribution. They're clear in terms of the expectations for them coming in. We're clear in terms of what they can bring to that as well. And it's having a continuing dialogue as you go through that to be able to say, are we doing the right things? Are you doing the right things? And what needs to change? And can we continue to evolve as part of that?
Yeah, very good. And if we were looking at the sort of the top tips, or maybe you call these ground rules, and we could probably both sort of have a view on this, in terms of just getting really the basics right, Siobháin, for people to say, right, well, look, if I get this right, this sort of gets me in the door. So taking, they've got the academic piece tidied up. What would be the sort of the basics to get right from there? Once they're making the application, what are the steps to take?
I would say that know the industry and the company that you're applying for. Why are you applying for them? So have a research it. And that may sound quite obvious, but sometimes you will get people doing a scattergun approach just in terms of the hopes that something will land. So when you're applying to an organization, say, okay, well, do I like the industry in which it's in? What do I know about the company? Do I know about graduates who've gone through that? What are the values of the company? Do they live those values? Is that something that resonates with me? I mentioned previously, I would have left a job prior because the values, they ultimately just didn't sit well with me, and that was important for me. Now, maybe it won't be for everybody, but I think it's an important consideration for people as they go through. And I think the more, if you're really clear in terms of the industry you want to get in and the reasons why you want to be in that industry, and then you get more focus in terms of particular organizations. Well, go on LinkedIn, follow those organizations. What are the news updates that they're doing around that? Or what's the network of people who are there? Can you understand a bit more about their careers and how they've gone on? And I suppose the really important thing is that you come for an amazing good common sense, but you'd be amazed about sometimes what can happen. If you're invited to an assessment process, complete the assessment process. So there are so many different steps for different companies. It can be completely understand. It can be overwhelming. You have so many different things that are happening. If you've identified a company that is your dream company and they have three steps in that process, and you've invited to complete them. Don't leave it hanging or things like that, because if you don't complete an online assessment, that's going to eliminate you automatically from the next round from that side of things. And I suppose the other piece of advice I would say to anybody getting to an interview or to an assessment center stage is participate. We can only assess you on based on what we see in the day, and assessment centers will typically have a mixture of group activities and individual. And you may have somebody who is a shining star in their interview in the individual side of things, but isn't comfortable speaking up in the group discussions. We're assessing 3 exercises. So the balance of the interview may not be enough to get you through those other exercises if you don't participate and we can't see how you're like in that environment. So I think the important thing is that if you are somebody who may be a bit reticent about speaking up or participating in those kind of activities, learn to be able to say, okay, how can I make a contribution? It's not about speaking the most. It's about what is meaningful for you to be able to make a contribution as part of that, to be able to, because as an assessor, we're going to be able to say, right, they may have spoken 5 times, but actually the quality of what they said was really relevant from that side of things. So I think for what I would say as well, for any graduate who's applying for a role, really utilize their career services. I mean, career services across all of the higher education institutes, they do so much work, and they do mock interviews, they do mock assessment centers, they offer them online tests, they do personality assessments, they do all these different resources for students to help them identify. And I can completely appreciate for the students, it may be overwhelming with all this information, but just take it bit by bit. So if you are like in your coming to your final year, you've never thought about this, then it's probably going to be a really compressed journey, because a lot of the application windows are going to be happening within your first semester. But if you've got the opportunity, think about it in your second year. So, okay, actually, you know what? I'm doing marketing. What kind of organizations would I like to work for? Would I want to work for a startup? Do I want to work for a brand agency? Do I want to work with an employer? What area do I want to get into? And really start thinking at that stage, if at all possible, and using the resources at that stage. It's never too late. I mean, you may leave college, you may not get a graduate program. That's not the end of the world. There's a finite number of graduate programs. There's a finite number of graduate roles, but there's always an opportunity to get in.
Yeah.
And it's just about finding that opportunity that's right for you and then making the most of it. So I think that's important for people to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think what you mentioned about the career services, I mean, even at graduate level, the difference, you get two CVs and the information in terms of the background could be very similar. One could be, very short, just the academic results, maybe the name of an employer here and there. It's hard to get excited by that, in my opinion. I think if someone else presents it and, you might say, look, it's dressing it up a little bit, but it does demonstrate that they've an understanding of the skills attached to customer service, of showing up, basically having to build rapport relationships. I think what you've mentioned there about the assessment piece, we would often describe it as being assertiveness, and it's getting that sort of balance right. And there's a self-awareness piece that if someone's OTT assertive, that comes across, and that can sometimes be, it can lead to friction and sort of level of challenge. And therefore, if one's natural style is to be very assertive, then it's something to be aware of that, and maybe then to potentially listen first. And if someone is maybe, which is not uncommon, that people are still developing their own style and building confidence at that level, if they're naturally, they find it hard to be assertive, it's maybe just getting themselves in a good sort of headspace, maybe, to be able to identify one or two things, as you say there, that they feel strongly about, basically, that they're able to then identify. And that's obviously, sort of demonstrating that skill. Just, and this is, I'm hoping, Siobháin, this is really useful information. A lot of the people you've covered. Just from this, maybe more your from an opinion perspective. What's your view about specializing versus maybe going through a broader training program? Because I'll give you an example. My nephew's doing engineering in UCD. I think his first semester was basically pre-COVID. He was having the time of his life, and obviously, look, it has been a challenging couple of years. I think he's in the thick of it now in third year, and balancing his sort of finals as well as having a bit of fun and getting out and about. But it's an interesting discussion for him, because I think he's sort of going down the structural engineering route for the time being. That may be an area he's looking at, and very lucky, the world's his oyster. I think he's going to do a bit of traveling, and then just for the summer. And what do you see as being, and not specifically about him, but what are the pros and cons, do you think, about maybe specializing, going down a specific route, and maybe doing a broader sort of management training program?
In terms of graduate programs or degrees?
Yeah. No, sorry. Once you've done your degree, basically after that as being a next step. So a specialist might be to go down a route of being a really specific engineer, and that might be a high value skill set. But you're sort of tying your colours to the mast then fairly early on. So it's just get your own view. It'd be good to understand.
Yeah, and I mean, it does depend on the individual, I think, because as I mentioned earlier, some people would be hyper focused in terms of where they want to get to, and they will see that specialized program as where they want to be. And it can be definitely the right opportunity for them, and it'll give them the skills and the training that they need to be able to get to their desired role. Whether they like it or not when they get there, that's a different question. But I think when you look at those specialized programs, it's really important to have the balance of the personal growth as well as part of that, so that they can continue to reflect and question to make sure it is the right thing for them as they go through it. With our program, if I just touch on that, because it's specialized in the sense of we hire graduates into specific areas. So, for example, we'd bring them into a buying program or a finance program and that. So it's not as highly specialized as engineering, but still kind of setting them, I suppose, at the beginning on a particular career path. And we certainly would have had people say, like, actually, I'm not sure I'm on the right path for me at this point in time. So we have actually sometimes transferred graduates from one stream to another. So, for example, from marketing to buying, for example, we would have had from that side. But what I would say to anybody is that the key thing to remember as you go through this is you're picking up knowledge and skills in anything you do, and those are transferable. And I've seen that in my own career. I've seen engineers who would have gone into HR or who would have gone into senior roles. We've had people who had come from a very general background, work into and be able to get to a certain level, and then based on using and leveraging primarily their strategic skills, but also people skills, and be able to do that, to be able to move across different functions and to be able to progress from that side of things. So I think the key thing for people to focus on is, in addition to your technical side, is really to look in terms of how are you growing from growing in terms of your skills, but also your self-awareness in terms of what you bring. People used to refer to them as soft skills, and they're probably still called soft skills to a point. I like the term intrapersonal skills, and it's this piece of, and it's going to more and more important is, how do we collaborate with others? How do we communicate with others? How can we bring people along that journey? And all of these things may have been potentially overlooked before. You said, okay, we'll go out. I'm using the engineer example because you mentioned it, but you can get yourself a really highly specialized engineer. He will have certain skills that you will need, but will he have the skills that you need to have him be a leader if that's where you need him in the business? And he may well do if he is somebody who's looked after those interpersonal skills for himself and really developed that side of it. And I think that's important, I think, for people as they go through their careers, to be able to reflect, to take time out and say, okay, well, where am I at this point in time? So how do I communicate with others? How can I influence others? How can I realize, how can I break something complex down into more simple terms to bring people along that journey? And these, it may sound a bit trite, but these are things which will stand you in massive stead as you progress within your career, because that's what leaders, that's what businesses are looking for in their leaders, to be able to manage others. Because if you want to be that manager of people and to be the senior leader, you're going to have to release some of your specialized skills, or not exercise them as frequently as possible, because you'll be managing others with those skills. And it's useful to dip in and out of it, but it's a case of, okay, right, how do I get the best out of the people as well as part of that? It may sound like I'm coming against specialists. I'm not. But I think anyone going down that path, certainly absolutely fantastic. That's where you want to be. If it's a case where you start in that and you realize it's not where you want to be, you haven't lost time. You've gotten skills from that. It's now, how do you transfer those across to somewhere else? If you go on and you finalize that, and it's complement your personal development along with that, and those interpersonal skills, I think you're way in hack. Say the expression.
But I mean, that skill across, and I primarily recruit in the accounting space, the ability to explain financial information to non-financial people is an extremely high value skill, and I think that's what we're sort of discussing there, about the ability to influence. Just maybe as a sort of a final piece, I mean, and speak again on the accounting side, I've always retail to me is a brilliant space. You get really sort of live feedback all of the time. Musgrave have a number of fabulous brands, not least SuperValue now, who are in a really, really competitive space. Very often accountants who've worked in retail, they can almost join any sector because you're really in the thick of it. The information or the decisions that are made have such an impact basically on performance. What's your own experiences from maybe working in the retail space, and what you sort of enjoy about it, and how you see it as a sort of an opportunity maybe from a graduate perspective?
Yeah, I mean, retail is one of those places where you'll never have the same day twice. And as I would say to graduates that come in, you'll experience every single emotion within retail, with the exception of boredom. So you'll be delighted, you'll be passionate, you'll be frustrated. All these different things will come to pass, but it'll go so quickly. And I think the beauty about retail is that you can see such immediate results and immediate impact as part of that. And I do think sometimes people can overlook retail as a career. I think sometimes people may just think of retail as just the actual physical store and people working shop floor, which is fantastic and has a hugely powerful training ground for many of our graduates have come through as part of that. But there are so many opportunities for people to progress within that industry, from within the stores themselves through management levels. There's a lot of development programs that people can go through as part of that, but also from the associated back office, if you want to call it. So you've got your supply chain elements of it, you've got your marketing, your finance, your IT, all those different areas, and you get different levels of exposure to the retail store itself as part of it. But you really have that opportunity to see something that can come from a concept into a product, to see it sitting on the shelf, and then getting customer feedback in terms of how they buy that and how they react to that. So it's hugely satisfying, I think, for people who like that kind of an industry. It's not going to be for everybody, completely get that, but I think people sometimes overlook it because they don't necessarily appreciate the breadth and scale of opportunities that are there. I look, hands up, as I said, when I joined Musgrave many moons ago, I wasn't terribly au fait with the retail world. I learned very quickly, and I've learned. I have to say, one of my roles before would have been giving HR advice to our retail partners and that. So you hear about every single potential situation that could arise in the store. So it did a massive amount for my professional learning. But it gives you such an appreciation for what our retail partners do in the community, because they're embedded in every single community across the country, across the world. Everyone has retail.
Yeah.
It opens so many doors and so many experiences a part of that. So probably gone off tangent again there, Paul, but
yeah.
I do think there's an opportunity for that. And you mentioned finance, and I think that's one of the reasons why the finance graduates who come to us can see the benefits of that, in terms of that fast pace, but also it's the kind of looking to the future trends, what's coming down the line. We have graduates who work with our retailers as well, and looking in terms of the profitability. We have them working with our buying teams to be able to say, okay, if you change the price on this amount, then what's that going to impact on it there? So there's, and if any of my accounting colleagues now are listening to this, they're probably hands up in horror in terms of how I'm explaining their roles. But it is something that people derive a huge amount of satisfaction from.
Yeah.
But you have to be, I suppose, it has to be what you want from that side of it. So.
Yeah, very good. So Siobháin, we've covered a huge amount of ground, and I'm hoping this will be really useful now to both graduate employers as well as sort of up and coming graduates and everyone associated. Anything we've missed, or anything you'd like to add?
I suppose there's a lot happening at the moment, I suppose, within the graduate field. We all know that there's a war for talent going on at the moment. So for graduates, I think, coming onto the market, they're going to see a lot of graduate employers out there, and they're going to have to make choice in terms of which path they go down. And again, there are finite opportunities, but I think for graduates, it's going to be important for them to be able to look at themselves and to that point to say, look at the industry, but then again, look at the values, look at what's going to help you in terms of your career longer term. Sometimes we can look at the money side of it and say, seduced, look, this is going to get me to the highest salary, fastest way possible. And if that's a career path that sits right with you, absolutely perfectly. But it's that piece of early on in your career, if you can learn to take the time to reflect and say, what's important to me? What do I want it to stand for? How does this company align with that? How can I make a difference there? And will they support me in terms of that development? I think that's a good opportunity for people to be able to say, okay, right, that's how I want to shape my career. And again, if you're not sure what you want to do right now, that's fine too. Just be open to new experiences and see what comes along. And all of those experiences matter, and it's how you can then, using your wonderful interpersonal skills, communicate that to employers as you get down and progress within your career.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, I think we're lucky. I mean, one of the things, just an observation, is in Ireland, basically, look, it's a fantastic number of multinationals that are here, but we've some brilliant domestic employers, Irish companies that are doing great things, and I think that presents lots of opportunities, and it creates a really healthy economy. So Siobháin, you've been fantastic with your time. If people want to get in contact, where's the best place to find you? Is it LinkedIn, or what's the
LinkedIn is the best place to get it. If they're interested in our graduate program, they go to musgravegraduates.com, and actually they can register their interest for future roles for 2023 on that as well, and we'll contact people directly on that. But certainly delighted for people to contact me directly on LinkedIn, or you can also follow Musgrave Early Careers on LinkedIn as well.
Brilliant stuff.